Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Yeah. Extra, reading the issue. Raw news, unapologetic, no tissue. Catch the wave, the flow first certain. Nothing pull you in like a Pittsburgh current. Free from influence, nothing less than. No flexing, aim for progression. We cover news, politics, art forms, and entertainment that comes in all sources. Pittsburgh, a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pittsburgh Current podcast. It is a date in May. I don't know what day it is. As I've said before, I don't know what time it is. I don't know what it's like outside. I don't, it's life in the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we may be hearing some rumblings that the governor may be listing a lot of Southwest PA counties today as going into the yellow zone, which means certain businesses can begin opening up and so forth. So we've got that to look forward to, or we've got the disappointment to look forward to if it doesn't happen today. New issue of the Pittsburgh Current should be in your inboxes already this week, and also online at pittsburghcurrent.com. A lot of stuff this week. I did a roundup of, we did some stories looking at statistics at the Allegheny County Jail last week online, and we sort of updated that and put those stories in the digital issue, looking at the racial disparity numbers at the Allegheny County Jail pre and post COVID-19. And spoiler alert, black incarcerated people did not fare well in those numbers. Unfortunately, as you know, despite this is a massive change in how our lives have been going the last couple of months, it's still certain things never change, and that aspect of the justice system apparently is able to somehow stay the same despite a massive pandemic. So give that story a look. Also, we have got a story on the Pittsburgh Knights, the Pittsburgh's esports franchise. There are no other sports going on, but the Pittsburgh Knights are still competing in esports. And for those of you of a certain age, sorry, Boomer, I never really say that, or okay, Boomer, in its video game competition. So, which is big business. So give that a look. That's by our Matt Petrus. So today we are going to be talking politics, and on the line with me from Shreveport, Louisiana, at least for the moment, is friend and political analyst Kierran Young. Kierran, how you doing this morning?
I'm good, Charlie. How are you?
Good, man. How are you? So you've been down south for most of the year, right? So far, you worked on a campaign. Just kind of catch people up to what you've been up to.
I've been in Texas, in Houston, Texas, since December 1.
Yeah.
And currently, I'm deciding to go back home for my birthday and see my mom for Mother's Day. So.
Okay. And so what are your plans after that?
I'm talking to a couple of organizations about different positions. And considering running certain campaigns. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet, but COVID has kind of slowed everything down in the political space, hiring, things like that.
Yeah, so I actually just thought of this. I think it's interesting to maybe talk about a minute. So you've run for office here, you've worked on campaigns here. What was the difference between the atmosphere here when you're working on campaigns and what it was like in Texas during the primary?
Well, first of all, in a presidential year, they're significantly earlier than we are. So
sure, right.
In my political life, I'm used to voting for president around the third or fourth week of April.
Right.
And by that time, in a lot of cases, people have dropped out of the race. Some of the candidates are just names on the ballot. Being in Houston, seeing the huge targeted campaign that Mayor Bloomberg ran, spending a lot of money on his Mike for Black America program, which targeted Houston and Dallas very heavily. It's just interesting to see how presidential campaigns run in an area where they actually are trying to win votes.
Right.
Because in a lot of cases, by the time they get to us in a primary, we already know who the nominee is going to be, and it's kind of like, well, we're showing up to vote for United States Senate, and we're showing up to vote for our own local races. So, or focus on that.
Which is an excellent segue. We actually have a lot of topics we want to cover today, but let's start talking about the June 2nd primary, the now June 2nd primary, and
that was supposed to be on April 28th.
Supposed to be on April 28th, correct? And it got obviously pushed back. First, give me your take on what this pandemic is doing in terms of campaign disruption, and particularly, I would think that that's going to take more of a toll on challengers than it would incumbents.
So we were thankful in Texas that COVID came like right after the primary. But looking at states where I have friends like Maryland and New York, back home in Pennsylvania, they can't knock doors. In a lot of cases, it's hard to get volunteers to do things because you can't get people into an office anymore. You can't hold house parties where you'd get people to write postcards and maybe do 50 calls each. So a lot of the tools that we've used for organizing are just out the window. So a lot of the tactics that have been successful over the past two Bernie Sanders campaigns, meaning text messages and phone banking, virtual phone banks where you could just log in via your computer, those are the type of tactics that people are pushing towards, but there are a lot less impersonal tools to use as opposed to just going and knocking on somebody's door and meeting them in person. What's probably going to happen, especially on a local level, is you will see only candidates knock doors from now on. You might not see large groups of canvassers going out and knocking doors because people are fearful that people won't open their doors. So for the SEIUs of the world and like the DSA groups, that's where their power comes from, is going out to knock doors. So it kind of changes the dynamic for some of these organizations depending on who they're backing and what specific races.
So let's look at some of these races, and and this is something you and I have talked about, sort of before we came on the air and in the past. We've got some interesting races, obviously, and there are a lot of, it seems it's not just, in a lot of these, it's not just one person against another. There seems to be some underlying themes in a lot of these, be it Jessica Benham, Heather Cass, where you have Heather Cass, who clearly her social media posts were atrocious, and she gets the Democratic Party nomination. But let's talk about that in a minute. Let's hold all comments on that. We'll do that last.
You alluded to that on Super Tuesday, and I never got a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, and so let's hold that one. But then you also have you've got Summer Lee versus Chris Rowland. Let's start there. So you've got Summer Lee, who is the incumbent, and I don't, if anyone who I'm assuming most of our viewers know this, but just in case, because I think it's relevant. Summer Lee is an African-American woman, and Chris Rowland is not.
He's
a white guy, yeah. So where this flips, I mean, that doesn't automatically have to be a race issue, but where this kind of flips is, Summer, of course, is the incumbent, and Chris Rowland is not only a challenger. Chris Rowland is a challenger backed by County Executive Rich Fitzgerald. So let's talk about that race a little bit. What are your initial thoughts looking at this?
Well, I'd like to say, starting off, that I think it's deplorable that Mr. Fitzgerald would do this. I've seen him run around town and tell young people that they shouldn't run for something because we've got a good incumbent in that seat and blah, 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 blah. I can't support you. But then once a young person gets elected and beats one of these well-entrenched incumbents that he's throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at, you then get mad and you want to try to run somebody else because somebody won't sign off on your agenda. So I think part of it is, the county executive has not been used to people pushing back against him. It's been almost, 10 years, and he doesn't really get much pushback from the community. And I think Summer is standing up to him. And I also think Liv Bennett and Bethany Hallam, who were elected when I ran last year, who I ran with, endorsed, and supported, I really do believe that there's a change coming in the county. And you really have to look at the fact that Mr. Fitzgerald is term limited and he's a lame duck.
Right.
So now he has to try to make sure he puts people in place for the long term that will owe him. And I don't think that the rank and file voter is buying it anymore. They really do want newer leadership. And the Jessica Benham thing, just to touch on it, really is an outlier. When she was running against Harry Reid Shaw, I wouldn't have expected any of the people that are supporting her, like Bruce Krause and like the mayor, and to see Austin Davis out there. When she was running against Harry Reid Shaw, I never expected any of that to happen.
Right.
But as soon as it became a battle between a disability rights advocate and a passionate leader in her community and a Trump supporter, everybody lined up with the leader and the advocate in the community, which should have been the way it worked from the beginning. Harry Reid Shaw was 90 years old?
And he listen, let's not, I can't call Harry Reid Shaw a Trump supporter, but I've actually refused to call Harry Reid Shaw a Democrat for years. It's ridiculous to sort of, except for your support of the unions. Harry Reid Shaw is
the name that we have for folks that from the South Hills like him is Dino, Democrat in name only.
Right.
He's a Democrat because his neighborhood used to be a mill neighborhood where people walked down the city steps and went to the mills right down on the riverfront. It's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why he felt the need to resign and not resign, but retire and decide to not run for re-election. In the same vein, Jim Courts decided to do the same thing. Bill Courts.
So let's talk about that Summer Lee Chris Rowland race. What are you seeing there? What are you? I know that Summer's been active, doing virtual events, and look, Summer's got she's got a really, really strong base of supporters who, I don't know. Do you think that that's enough to? Well, you know what? Let me not put words in your mouth. What do you think in this race? Do you think it's basically it's her incumbency and that grassroots support that she's been growing now for going on 5 years versus the Fitzgerald political machine?
Well, it's not just grassroots support because of how vocal Summer is. There are organizations that will be very happy to come in and help her win re-election.
Right.
She's very, very progressive on environmental issues in ways that Mr. Fitzgerald is not. She's very anti-corporation and pro-finance reform in ways that Mr. Fitzgerald is just not. So I believe that there will be progressive organizations that come in to send mail.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with a county executive who can snap his fingers and raise $100,000 for somebody, or just write the check himself,
right,
it puts you in a tough position. Also, with the COVID-19 epidemic, Summer has the support of SEIU, DSA, and a lot of other organizations that like to go out and knock doors.
Right.
And that may put her in a position where she doesn't have the ability to go out and do what would really help a candidate like her win. And that's really what I'm worried about, not just with her, but with some of the other incumbent challengers. Because you can overcome not having all the money in the world by having a lot of energy and putting a lot of work into it. But if you can't even do the work because of some outside force, it makes it a lot more difficult to win a race.
So what do you think, though?
I think she wins.
I do too.
If I had to guess, I would think she wins because I've seen some of the mail pieces that Chris Rowland is sending out. He's trying to portray himself as a progressive, but not actually telling you what that actually means. He's trying to push a narrative that him and Summer are effectively the same. If you look at some of their mail pieces, it's just the only difference, if you really looked at it, is he's white and she's black. So basically, the line that they're trying to draw is, if you're looking for a nice, safe white guy to vote for, not the scary, angry black woman, vote for Chris Rowland. And that goes kind of hand in hand with what the Trib did by darkening a photo of her, or using a very dark photo of her.
Right.
It's pretty much par for the course for what happens in Western Pennsylvania when it comes to issues of race and politics. I don't know if you remember what happened in 2017 with Judge Woodruff's finance reports, but
I do.
the Republican Party ran an attack ad that is against judicial ethics, where they darkened his face and, you know, called into question some of the decisions that he made that weren't even decisions that he made.
Right.
So it was very misleading. So I think that this is par for what we've seen in history, and I think this if Chris Rowland wins, this type of stuff will continue to be rewarded because as of right now, nobody has shown that you're going to be punished for doing this type of thing.
Right. Let's stay in another race where I'm actually interested in getting your take on the congressional race between Jerry Dickinson and Mike Doyle, incumbent Mike Doyle, long time incumbent Mike Doyle. There's a lot been going on in that race recently. Dickinson says that Doyle refused to participate in a debate sponsored by was the
NAACP.
NAACP, right? And I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember which organization it was. And Doyle basically said that's that. So he says it's not true because it seemed to be like a scheduling thing or something like that, or because he was working on the COVID response or something. I don't remember exactly. But that's still, you're saying you're not going to do it for whatever reason. What do you see in this race, and what about that recent? And then, then after that, a number of African American leaders in the community came out in support of Jerry Dickinson with written support and full on support. So, what do you make of this race, and how much of this race is if there's a handicap there for Jerry Dickinson, constitutional law professor, it's that the COVID-19 pandemic sort of hit, and that certainly took him off the streets, which he was going out, he was doing a lot of canvassing. So give me your thoughts on this race.
So my thoughts on this particular race are that there are people out there that are looking for a change. Although Mike Doyle has been there a very long time, there are some questions that people have in regards to his leadership and what he's brought back to the district. He's the dean of the Pennsylvania delegation, at least the Democrats. He's the longest serving Democrat. He doesn't chair a committee. There are a lot of things that people are looking at in regards to Mike Doyle and thinking, man, for you to have been there that long, we sure could use a little bit more.
Right.
But I think, Mr. Doyle or Congressman Doyle has a view that if he has the support of certain Black elected officials, that Black members of the community will follow along with them in their ideas of how things should operate. And it's really just a status quo mentality, which is really represented by the fact that he blew off an opportunity to talk directly to Black people about his agenda. I do think, and I believe Chase Patterson is the president of the NAACP, and he did endorse Jerry Dickinson, so that may have influenced Mike's decision. But Chase also used to work for Mike Doyle.
Right.
So it's, to me, I would have said, well, I'll show up and I'll push my message and push my agenda. To me, it shows a lack of respect on behalf of the congressman for the Black community. And we're almost 40% of his district. Yeah. And so I will be eager to see how he, reaches out to the Black community outside of the elected officials going forward.
And that's what's interesting is that's one of the main things that Jerry Dickinson was pushing when I talked to him sometime last fall. I don't even remember when it was. It was early. Is that the representation there for the Black community just wasn't there, and or at least wasn't at a level that it should be. And his other point, of course, was a little bit of what you alluded to, which is, this is a safe blue seat. A Republican is never getting their hands on Mike Doyle's seat. So that should give you sort of almost like free reign to turn it into a bully pulpit almost, and do a lot more in DC overall than just sort of voting.
I think the problem is that I think the problem is that he kind of just goes with the status quo. He kind of, votes for Nancy Pelosi for speaker. He doesn't make any moves or any machinations to try to get any more power for himself. And I think, that's part of the reason why he has a challenger. For you to have been there that long and you don't chair a committee,
Right.
it's a pretty big deal. And I've asked Congressman Doyle's office for some information regarding issues, especially around public transit, because the bulk of Allegheny County's public transit money is passed through from the federal government, and
Right.
in a lot of cases, you just don't hear them talking about that because they believe that that's a county issue. And certain people who actually have to deal with, the public transportation system would want their congressman to be more involved in making sure that public transportation is administered fairly and the people who need it are getting access to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the big knocks on Congressman Doyle. And, he kind of defers to Mr. Fitzgerald because that's an entity that's controlled by the county executive. But at the same time, I believe that a congressperson is supposed to be an independent voice who has his or her hand on the purse strings to follow where the money is going and make sure it's being spent correctly. And I don't necessarily know that Mr. Doyle does that. I kind of believe that he's just involved in the cabal of elected officials like the mayor, like the county executive, who just all kind of go along with each other no matter what.
So handicap this one for me. What do you see in this race? What has to happen, or what is happening that could allow Dickinson to again? We're talking about a completely different time. We're not talking about a challenger versus an incumbent, a strong challenger versus an incumbent in any other year. This is a year again where we're limited. Candidates are limited on what they can do. So handicap this one for me. How do you see this one playing out?
I honestly don't know. I'm very interested in a lot of these races because of COVID-19. To see what works and what doesn't, and also the mail-in ballots. I can see this going one of two ways. I can see us ending up with a new congressman by a large margin because of the mail-in vote. I can also see us with the same congressman because by a large margin because of a mail-in vote, because of name identification. So it could go either way. I'm eager to see, and I haven't seen any polling data around this, but I'm eager to see how people feel about a change in Congress.
Right. Let's do a couple more of these because we got some other topics we want to talk about. Let's talk about. Actually, I think it's kind of an interesting one. Let's talk about Emily Kincaid versus Adam Ravenstahl. So I know you keep up on stuff, so I know you know about this. But for the first time in his career, in his political career, Adam Ravenstahl was endorsed by Planned Parenthood PAC of Pennsylvania. And just to clear that up, because I've gotten that wrong before, and they've asked me to clarify, so I'll say this: that we're not talking about Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania.
You're talking about the Action Fund,
right? This is right. This is the Action Fund, the political action committee that does endorsements and supports candidates and so forth. So Adam Ravenstahl, who was to call him pro-life would be unnecessary because it was such a strong part of his identity. And then last year, I think he started voting for some pro-choice legislation, and some of it was legislation that he had voted to block in previous votes. So this was, so just to wrap up what happened. So there's people lose their mind that Adam Ravenstahl was endorsed. And I remember I started working on a story. It was a Friday morning and I had it all sort of ready to go. And I talked to Emily Kincaid and I talked to Adam Ravenstahl. But by the end of the day, what Planned Parenthood PAC had decided to do was do a co-endorsement of both candidates. And again, Emily Kincaid is somebody who has worked on this issue. It's not just that she believes in choice. She has worked on this issue. So talk about that race. I mean, the whole thing just seemed very strange. What are you seeing in that race?
So listen, this is par for the course with their relationship with incumbents. They actually endorsed Ricky Burgess last year, who was at one time a very, very pro-life minister. So this type of thing, them giving wiggle room to people to change their point of view, I think it has a lot to do with certain support that people are getting from other elected officials. When you have people throwing their weight around to make sure that you get reelected, that runs down the board. That means I put pressure on people who are on boards that get to endorse and things like that. And I talk to those people and I make sure that they're supporting me. I think the big problem is that a lot of these organizations feel that they have to work more with incumbent elected officials, and they don't necessarily feel the need to work with and or help the people who have been doing things for them, like showing up and volunteering, going on lobbying trips, making phone calls to their legislators. People who have been doing that kind of organizing get blown off when they run for office because we have a pre-existing relationship with this elected official. I heard it hundreds of times.
Yeah, and that's sort of you have to wonder if it, and that's what the initial response was from the PAC, which was basically, hey, he's voted with us. Well, he didn't vote with you. In fact, voted against you for a long ass time before we got to whatever this revelatory moment was.
Well, it's like Burgess and Peduto. I mean, when they were on council, they hated each other.
Right.
They fought with each other like cats and dogs. And now all of a sudden, Bill walks up to me at an event when I'm running for city council. And I said, I don't understand why you're supporting the guy. The only thing Bill can say to me is he votes for my agenda 98% of the time.
Right.
How did that happen?
Right. I heard, well, I don't, but I heard this is one of those sort of lore in county council, the halls, the fifth floor lore, which is after Peduto won, and was the presumptive mayor. The story that always goes around is that Ricky Burgess approached him and said, I don't vote against the mayor. So that was kind of I was almost like immediately like almost a burying of the hatchet to be like, hey, this
and
is,
that's and that in a lot of cases is I don't vote against the mayor regardless of what it means for my community.
Sure.
So if that means that I'm giving away the land to your friends, fine. You just have to make sure that I get reelected and I get what I want. And it's just a horse trading game. And I had certain people pull me off to the side the closer the election got and say things to me like, we don't exactly approve of what the mayor does on everything. And he will fight to keep people in power and in place who vote for his agenda like that. Another person that comes to mind is Deb Gross. I mean, she voted for his agenda lockstep for quite some time.
Yeah.
And then she felt that she had to break from him because she knew he wasn't very popular in Lawrenceville.
Yeah.
He didn't endorse her because she went from voting for his agenda 90 some odd % of the time and it went down to 75.
Yeah.
So he's trying. It's all about him keeping control over the council so that he can continue to try to pass these tax initiatives so that he can fund the parks and give the money to his nonprofit friends. Right. It's all a scheme to take care of campaigns.
And so because I think this is going to dovetail into the final topic. Let's talk about the Jessica Benham, Heather Cass, and let's talk about the Allegheny County Democratic Committee. So that's what, honestly, it really started off as two stories. I wasn't surprised that when Harry Reedshaw supported a candidate and then you look and there's all kinds of like right-wing stuff. And let's be clear. Like I've said this from the beginning, the worst stuff that she wrote wasn't the fact that it was that she was pro-Trump. There were the things about, for example, that
the opioid epidemic.
Drug addicts should just overdose and die, and quote, there would be less shit in the world. And so these are the kinds of things that she said that really, again, but it does go back to the Trump thing, which is, apparently thinks he can say whatever he wants and still, have that support. And you can just locker room talk or, I was in a bad place. Well, you know what? I've been in a bad place and I never, I ruptured my Achilles. I didn't lay downstairs and, pray for other people to die because I was in a bad way. It's a bizarre thing that this happened. And then the committee backs it up, and then that started a whole fracas after that. So
Heather's father's a ward chair.
Father-in-law, correct?
I believe
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, that explains it. I mean, he in that district, I believe the 19th ward is the second largest. Well, I know the 19th ward is the second largest ward in the city.
Yeah.
The first being the 14th ward, which is where the mayor and the county executive come from.
Right.
The 19th is Tony Coghill used to be the chair, but I believe Mr. Cass is, or he's the chair of the 30th, which is just across Brownsville. So
I think that's true. I think that's
I think it is the 30th. So when you have relationships like that and your ward borders one of the largest wards in the city, I mean, it explains to me why Tony came out and endorsed her, no questions asked.
Right.
Somebody who endorsed me and supported me. This is how people operate. The thing that alarmed me was that Eileen just didn't pull the endorsement.
Right.
I really do believe that this isn't necessarily an indictment of the Democratic Party, because half of those committee people don't know what people are posting on social media, because most of them are in the geriatric stages of their life.
Right.
But we really do have an issue whenever, Eileen Kelly struggled to fire a guy who had made racist posts and sympathetic posts towards Dylan Roof. She wouldn't kick a committee person off the committee who beat up a black kid in a park. We caught national news over that. And now this. I think it's time. I really do think it's time for her to call it quits. I mean, the party will die under her leadership because nobody takes it seriously anymore. And I really do think that the committee people should refocus and try to pick a new chair. I'm not saying Nancy was the greatest chair, but she didn't have these type of problems. So
yeah, she did a pretty good job of, for whatever her agenda was, is to keep the house sort of in order, and regardless of, again, I no great fan necessarily of Nancy as a chair, but Nancy Patton Mills, but it was at least
if you had to pick one or the other, it's a clear choice. It's a no-brainer.
And I honestly, I do believe that she would have handled this situation completely differently.
Well, she definitely would have, because she would have been both party chair and county chair at the same time. So as the state party chair, she would have had to move very quickly, because there would have been pressure on her from people like Sharif Street, the vice chair, Austin Davis. There would have been pressure from Philadelphia. Yeah. She would have had to handle the problems going on in her own county committee, and have to handle them very, very quickly, or else it would seem like she was a sympathizer, like Eileen Kelly is. And I really don't think that this whole Heather Cass issue should be given much more light. I think it's a part of a greater problem, and the reason why it caught so much attention was because of the history and the pattern that we've had since Eileen has been the chair of the party. It's been less than 2 years, and it's been 3 major national events that all revolve around racist and insensitive things that people have said and done. So I really think that the conversation should center around Eileen and the fact that there's a problem with her. And we really do need to rectify that problem so that the Democratic Party can get stronger in Western Pennsylvania.
What do you think the future of the party endorsement is? You think it's still?
I think I think it's going to have to be revamped. The state party still does endorsements. Other states still do endorsements. The whole thing of it is there's just no secret ballot. Everybody has to show up in a room.
Right.
And you have to take the vote. The problem with that, and the reason why certain chairs don't like it, is because floor votes turn into fistfights.
Right.
and nothing will decrease your power faster than having 2 separate factions, or maybe even 3, fighting each other over an endorsement. And I think that's why Nancy never wanted to do it. And I think Eileen isn't astute enough and isn't, hands-on enough with the party to understand that she really does need to do this to provide it more credibility. Yeah. The Democratic Party, as you know, because you have Bethany Hallam on all the time, the Democratic Party doesn't even meet. The individual wards meet, but that's very few and far between. And some wards don't meet at all. Some wards only meet when there's an election coming up.
Right.
So, you really do need a chair who's going to address those type of problems. And if I had to bet on it, I would say that Bethany Hallam would be our next chair.
Yeah. And let's do one more of these and then let's move on. Because again, I think
are we still gonna do COVID response?
We are. Yeah. We were gonna do COVID. We are gonna do COVID response. I definitely want to do that. But let's talk about just briefly about Daryl Metcalf and Dan Smith. That was one that you had on your list there to talk about. So,
well, I mean, Daryl Metcalf just seems to be on this crusade against the governor to reopen the state and give everybody coronavirus. I guess he's on the same conference calls as like Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Brian, what's his face down in Georgia, and the lieutenant governor of Texas, who suggested that we sacrifice our grandparents for the economy.
Right.
These people are just crazy. Like it's a level of crazy that fact doesn't penetrate, science doesn't penetrate. And I really do hope that people around the county, especially Democrats, mobilize and help Dan out and go up there and knock on doors for him. Because I personally think we have a lot of Republicans who I'm friends with, who I can have cordial conversations with. I think Daryl Metcalf is not just a disgrace to the Republican Party. He disgraces Western Pennsylvania right now, making especially the suburbs look like just racist places where, you know, there are a bunch of people who don't accept others. He had a problem with Chris Rabb in the legislature, where I believe he threatened to shoot Mr. Rabb with a sidearm that he carries. He had problems with Brian Sims. He called him a touchy-feely homosexual. The state rep from Philadelphia. He's also had
the guy who touched his arm. He freaked
the guy
out
who touched
his arm.
The guy who he flipped out when a guy touched his arm in a meeting and said things like, "There are members of your party who like that type of thing."
Yeah.
To a straight married man who he's been on a committee with for several years. It's just a level of crazy that even if that district elected another Republican, I just think it's time for Daryl Metcalf to go.
Yeah,
this just does not make our state look good. It's so bigoted and so racist and so hateful. And I know that there are other Republicans out there who don't agree with everything that he does.
Right.
And I think we as Pennsylvanians just need to say enough is enough.
Yeah, and I think Dan made a lot of inroads during the last election. I think he was starting off strong again from what I was seeing, and then again, like in COVID-19, once again, sort of.
Well, he's in a better position than other people.
Why is that?
Because he will probably get the time to knock doors and talk to voters. But if you're Summer Lee right now, the primary is everything for you. There's not going to be a Republican challenger.
Right.
So if you're some of these other members of the state house, like Emily Kincaid, or even somebody running for Congress like Jerry Dickerson, it's now or never for you. June 2nd is your everything.
Yeah.
For Dan, you know, we have a couple of races around the county. Anita Kulik is one of them. Pam Ivino is one of them. All these people are gearing up for November.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's their crown jewel. That's the only way they get back into office. And I think the thing that'll benefit him is hopefully COVID-19 dies down and he's able to get back out there and press the flesh and talk.
Get a couple strong months of door knocking. Yeah. So let's talk about, we've been mentioning it, COVID-19 throughout the whole thing. And I know this is something that you very much want to talk about, which is the response to COVID-19. You know what? I'm just going to let you, because I know you've got some points I know you want to get to. So go ahead. You start the conversation.
I've been in Texas where I was in Harris County where there was a lockdown order, and there still is a lockdown order and a suggestion from the county judge that everyone wear a mask. I think that across the board is something that should be done. I'm also here in Louisiana, and like right around the corner at the Walmart, the Louisiana National Guard is stationed, you know, running a COVID-19 testing site. This is the first time I've seen a military deployment around this.
Yeah.
So, you know, depending on where you are in the country depends on how seriously your local elected officials took this matter. Houston took it very, very seriously. It's a big international city. It looks like certain rural areas that I've been in haven't taken it as seriously.
Right.
Partially because people are more spread out and don't come in contact with each other as much anyway. But the bigger issue with COVID-19 is going to be the massive loss in revenue for municipalities, cities, states, things like that. And for Pittsburgh especially, you know, I'm wondering, and I've been asking the question: are they going to have to raise our taxes in order to pay for the hundreds of millions of dollars lost in convention revenue, hotel revenue, personal seat licenses, all of those big events that bring in tax revenue to the city? Are they going to have to raise taxes? Is Bill Peduto going to have to raise taxes on everyday people? I know a couple of weeks ago he held an address in the city council chamber where he talked about the city's budget and the city's finances. Right. And he made some comments that I found to be alarming, that made it sound like we're going to have to raise your taxes. And as I've written before here with the current, I believe that before we turn to the average citizen and say, hey, we need more money from you, there are some entities in town that need to start chipping into the pot, namely the big four: UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University, and Highmark. So before we go and try to raise property taxes and then raise a wage tax or a commuter tax, we really need to start to look at some of these large property owners and making sure that they're paying their fair share. Also, I haven't heard a single thing about the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh canceling tax abatements. I mean, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of abatements out there that could be anywhere from 10 to 20. I think the average is 10 in Allegheny County. So unless we're talking about doing drastic things like that to try to fill the hole in revenue, we shouldn't be talking about raising taxes on rank and file people who seem to get their taxes on their property, especially raised every 2 years, every time somebody in town comes up with a new initiative that needs to be funded. Like the parks tax, where our taxes just went up.
Right. What about so there's the issue of an issue that I know my readers are familiar with because I've been covering it for 4 weeks now. The issue of the Allegheny County Jail and that response. Most recently yesterday, and you guys could check out my latest story at pittsburghcurrent.com. You've got officials like Chelsea Wagner, Bethany Hallam, board member Terry Klein, former Allegheny County councilwoman. They voted in favor of doing universal testing at the jail, and that's something that's now, a lot of jurisdictions are doing that, and they're finding that their asymptomatic infection rates are sky high, and there really seems to be a pushback from the county and from the county jail management to do universal testing, continuing to say, we're following CDC guidelines, and we're talking with constantly with the being advised by the Allegheny County Health Department. But no one has ever given a good reason why there can't be or shouldn't be universal testing. It's almost, I don't know. It almost they don't want to know how widespread it is.
They don't want to know because and we talked about this off air. There's a huge liability issue. Yeah. If I'm in the custody of the county and I contracted this, and they didn't do everything in their power to give me health care, and the Allegheny County Jail already has a really poor history of providing health care.
Right.
I've heard of people going days without insulin. So, that I think that's why you're seeing people like Chelsea Wagner pushing back on this, because they know it could be a huge fiscal issue for the county. But you have people like County Executive Fitzgerald who penny pinch every single dime and probably don't believe that we should waste this type of money testing all these people in the jail. And it's really a terrible thing because there's no way to practice social distancing in jail. Not in the Allegheny County Jail. The bunks are stacked on top of each other. 2 men are in every cell. There's 60 cells on each pod, so that puts you at 120 people on a pod, maybe more.
Roughly, yeah.
Depending on crowding. So that it's very, very hard to stop the spread of communicable diseases in places like that. So testing has to be everything, testing and treatment, and they're more focused on other things than the people in the jail. And I think it'll only come home to roost if there were to be like a mass die in the jail. They would then take notice, and then they would be liable for it. And then they would have to talk about how they were given an opportunity to test people. They had the ability to do it, but they decided not to because those people weren't important to them.
Right.
And there's a lot of that in Allegheny County is we only do for the people who are important to us.
Right.
So I think that this comes from that same mentality, and it's very, very dangerous and can lead to people dying.
Right. Kierran Young, thanks for joining us. Anything you want to touch on before we go? Anything you want to give a quick hot take on in 2 minutes?
Well, I think that, when we are looking at the city of Pittsburgh, I think it's really time that we start to look for new leadership who are not controlled by the nonprofit class and the infrastructure of the greater political donor class that is around. I really do believe that some of the reasons why you end up with the problems that you have in Pittsburgh, and issues are always being passed on to the rank and file homeowner or the rank and file voters, because they don't have a lobbyist. They don't have a guy who's running around town holding dinners and fundraisers for these people and just stroking them checks so that they do what they say. So whenever it comes time to raise taxes on somebody, I'm not going to raise the taxes on people who are giving me money to run my campaigns. I'm going to raise it on the rank and file voter and hope they don't notice.
Right.
And that's where we are, and it's becoming very, very dangerous. We're overtaxing our property. We're overtaxing people in Allegheny County and in Pittsburgh. And I really do think it's time for people, or for the elected officials, to start to look at providing property tax relief for people. They've been talking about it for all my life.
Right.
When's it going to happen?
Right. Exactly. Kierran Young, thanks a lot for joining us. Good to talk to you, man. It's been a while, so I appreciate it. Check out new issue Pittsburgh Current, pittsburghcurrent.com. Also check your inbox. You can sign up to have it delivered to your inbox each and every Tuesday, and which will be coming out this week. So check us out, pittsburghcurrent.com. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Yeah. Extra, reading the issue. Raw news, unapologetic, no tissue. Catch the wave, the flow first certain. Nothing pull you in like a Pittsburgh current. Free from influence, nothing less than. No flexing, aim for progression. We cover news, politics, art forms, and entertainment.